Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something you sent us. It's an article and a video commentary about China's new marriage law. Seems like this law is making waves, especially among women. So what do you make of it all so far?
It's definitely stirring up some strong reactions. Yeah, this law really touches on some sensitive nerves, gender roles, finances, and relationships. What even family means these days. It's and these aren't just concerns within China. We're seeing these conversations happening globally.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it feels like it's hitting on something universal. So to get us started, can you break down the main points of this new law? What exactly is changing?
Okay, so there are a few key changes. The law introduces a cooling off period before divorce can be finalized.
Okay.
It also establishes clearer guidelines for how property is divided when a couple splits up.
Okay.
And there's a big emphasis on encouraging prenuptial agreements.
Interesting. So it sounds like they're really trying to encourage people to think carefully before jumping into marriage, and maybe even more carefully before jumping out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand the context here. China is facing a declining marriage and birth rate. They see it as a national crisis. And this law is in part an attempt to stabilize the family unit and encourage people to have more children.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, both the article and the video you sent really focus on the property division aspect of this law. Why is that such a hot button issue?
Well, the new law makes a clear distinction between property acquired before marriage or through inheritance,
right,
and property acquired during the marriage. So anything you own before getting married or anything you inherit, that remains yours. Your spouse has no claim to it in a divorce.
Ah, I see. So it's trying to protect what people bring into the marriage individually. But from what I gathered, that's causing some tension. Some women are saying it feels like their contributions to the marriage, especially having children, aren't being valued equally. It's even been compared to treating the uterus as an asset that's taken advantage of.
It's a powerful analogy, isn't it? And it gets at the heart of some deep-seated anxieties. For generations, there's been this expectation, not just in China, but in many cultures, that the husband is the primary financial provider. And this new law seems to challenge that. It's pushing for a more precise accounting of financial contributions from both partners.
So instead of just assuming who contributed what, it's saying, let's look at the bank statements, the deeds, the receipts.
Exactly, yeah.
But the article brought up this interesting point. If we're being so specific about finances, shouldn't other contributions to the marriage be recognized too? Like, what about the time and energy women often invest in raising children, which can limit their career opportunities?
You're right. That's a critical point. The uterus as an asset argument is provocative. But it raises an essential question. Is it truly just about the uterus, or is it a metaphor? For all the unseen labor and sacrifices women often make in a marriage that don't have a clear financial value.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, if we're talking about fairness and being specific about contributions, how do you even begin to put a price tag on something like that?
It's incredibly complex. And this law is forcing a conversation about how societal expectations around childcare and career paths, how those things intersect with the financial realities of relationships. And it's challenging us to reevaluate what we even consider valuable within a marriage.
It's like we're being forced to rethink the whole equation.
Exactly, yeah. And it's fascinating to see how these conversations are playing out, not just in legal terms, but in the court of public opinion as well.
Well, speaking of public opinion, the video you sent featured some very strong opinions, especially from the male commentator.
Oh, yeah?
He had a lot to say about gold digging and this idea that relationships have become too transactional.
He certainly didn't hold back.
Yeah.
He actually said, and I quote, "It's like some women are approaching relationships with a shopping list. A high income, a luxury car, a fancy apartment."
Wow. While his delivery is a bit blunt, I have heard those kinds of sentiments before. It does make you think, how much are financial expectations influencing modern relationships?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's important to listen to these viewpoints critically. Are these statements just broad generalizations? Or are they rooted in specific cultural contexts? This video gives us a chance to explore those nuances, to unpack the complexities of gender dynamics and the very real power imbalances that can exist when it comes to finances and relationships.
This is already giving me so much to think about. And, this conversation reminds me of something else the video mentioned, the bride price tradition in China. Can you explain what that is for a listener who might not be familiar?
Of course. So the bride price is a payment, traditionally made by the groom's family to the bride's family. Historically, it was a way to show respect and acknowledge the value the bride brought to her new family. Essentially, a thank you to her family for raising her. But as China has modernized, the bride price has evolved, and it's taken on some different meanings.
So it's not just a simple exchange of money. There's a deeper cultural significance attached to it.
Absolutely. But it's also become entangled in these conversations about finances and expectations within marriage. It's another example of how tradition and modernity are clashing in China right now.
Okay. So this bride price tradition is adding another layer of complexity to what we're discussing. It feels like it connects directly to the property division issue and these shifting expectations around who contributes what in a relationship.
You're absolutely right. It's all interconnected. And I think it's a perfect example of how this new marriage law in China isn't just about legal technicalities.
Yeah.
It's about navigating much, much deeper cultural and societal shifts that are happening all over the world.
Definitely. So we've got this new law, and it's aiming for clarity and fairness when it comes to finances in a marriage, but it's also raising all these questions about how we define fairness, how we value different kinds of contributions, and whether we can even separate those financial aspects from the emotional ones in a relationship.
Precisely. And as we mentioned before, these aren't just questions for China to grapple with. They're relevant for all of us, no matter where we live or what our personal relationship experiences have been.
This is already making me rethink some of my own assumptions about relationships, and we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. There's so much more to unpack. Let's dive deeper, shall we? This whole discussion about the bride price, it really struck a chord with me. It's like a microcosm of the broader societal shifts we're talking about.
I agree. And the video commentator even made a point of saying something like, in the West, we have a hard time grasping this whole bride price concept. It's almost like it challenges our fundamental ideas about how marriage should work.
It definitely pushes us outside of our comfort zones. And I think his perspective, it reflects a common viewpoint. But to really understand the bride price, we have to consider the historical and cultural context. It's not simply about money. It's about symbolism, tradition, the social fabric of a community. It's easy to judge from the outside, but these customs have deep roots.
That's a good point. And it sounds like even within China, the bride price is changing. You mentioned earlier that some rural areas are moving towards a zero bride price model. That seems like a pretty significant shift.
It is, and it reflects how economic pressures and evolving social attitudes are playing out on the ground. I mean, for some families, the bride price is becoming a burden rather than a tradition they want to uphold.
So they're having to weigh the cultural significance against the practical realities of life in modern China.
Right. And it's interesting to see how the government is responding to this. They've been actively encouraging the zero bride price approach, which shows how seriously they're taking this marriage and birth rate decline. They're trying to remove any potential obstacles that might prevent people from getting married.
It's like they're looking at every angle. But let's go back to the video for a moment. The commentator had quite a bit to say about how some women, approach dating and relationships. I remember he used the term transactional thinking. And suggested that, some women might be overly focused on the financial benefits of a relationship.
That's where things get really nuanced. And I think we have to be careful about generalizations. Yeah, there are absolutely individuals who approach relationships with a primarily transactional mindset, focused on what they can gain materially. But to claim that this applies to all women or even a majority of women, that's a vast oversimplification.
I get what you mean. It's like saying all men are only interested in one thing. It's a stereotype that ignores individual complexities. But he did raise a point about the role of social media in all of this. Do you think there's any truth to that? Like, could social media be contributing to this transactional thinking?
It's certainly worth considering. We know that social media often presents a very distorted view of reality. Yeah. People tend to, curate their online presence to showcase the most glamorous, exciting aspects of their lives and their relationships. This can create a sense of pressure, comparison, even competition, especially when it comes to relationships.
It's like everyone is trying to keep up with the Joneses, but it's playing out on Instagram and TikTok instead of in the suburbs. It could make someone feel like they're falling behind if their relationship doesn't look a certain way, or if it isn't, providing certain material benefits.
Exactly. And it's crucial to remember that social media is often about projection. It's not necessarily an accurate reflection of reality. It's easy to get caught up in the illusion of perfection and start to feel, inadequate in comparison.
Yeah.
And that can definitely influence how people perceive their own relationships and what they expect from a partner.
It's like comparing your behind-the-scenes footage to someone else's highlight reel.
Yeah.
Not exactly a fair comparison. So to recap, we've got this new marriage law in China, and it's intended to strengthen families, but it's sparking all these debates about gender roles, financial expectations, even the influence of social media on our perceptions of relationships. It feels like we're going way beyond just a legal change here.
Yeah.
We are. What's happening in China is a microcosm of the broader social and cultural shifts that are happening globally. This is about the very fabric of how societies function, how individuals relate to each other, and what it means to build a life together in the 21st century.
Yeah.
This new law is just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
It's fascinating how this deep dive into a law in China has led us to these broader universal questions about relationships. And while this law is specific to China, these conversations about fairness, finances, and the changing nature of marriage, they're happening everywhere.
Absolutely. What's happening in China offers a valuable lens through which we can examine our own beliefs and assumptions about partnerships.
It's like a mirror reflecting back these complex social dynamics we're all navigating. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listener? What do you think is most important for them to understand?
I think the most important takeaway is that relationships and the societal structures that shape them, they're constantly evolving. This new law in China is just one example of how governments and individuals alike are trying to adapt to these changes. There's no easy answer to these complex questions about fairness, finances, and the role of tradition versus modernity. But by engaging in these conversations, by challenging our assumptions, and by being open to diverse perspectives, we can move towards a deeper understanding of what it means to build meaningful, fulfilling relationships in the 21st century.
That's such a valuable insight, and I think it's a perfect note to end on. This deep dive has certainly given me a lot to think about, and I hope it's done the same for our listeners. It's been a fascinating journey, exploring not just a new law, but the very heart of what it means to connect with another human being in a world that's constantly shifting beneath our feet. As we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but think about how much ground we've covered. We started with a new marriage law in China, and we ended up exploring these universal questions about relationships, about fairness, about the pressures of modern life.
Yeah, it really is amazing how one specific event can open up such a wide-ranging conversation, isn't it?
It really is. And I think that's the beauty of these deep dives. We start with a seemingly narrow topic, and then bam, we find ourselves exploring these complex, interconnected ideas that resonate with everyone.
Exactly. And it's not just about finding the answers. It's about asking the right questions.
So to bring it back to our listener, what's the one question you'd like them to ponder after this deep dive?
That's a tough one. But I think the most important question is this: what does fairness in a relationship actually mean to you? It's easy to get caught up in the legal definitions, the financial calculations, the societal expectations, but ultimately a fulfilling and sustainable relationship requires a shared understanding of fairness that resonates with both partners on a deeper level.
I love that. It's such a simple question, but it gets right to the heart of it all, and it's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves.
And those answers might change over time. As we grow, as our circumstances change, the world around us evolves, our understanding of fairness in a relationship will likely evolve too.
And that's a really good point. It's not a static thing. It's an ongoing conversation, a process of discovery and renegotiation.
Yeah. Exactly. And that conversation, that ongoing process, that's what ultimately helps us build stronger, more authentic connections with the people we love.
Beautifully said. Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've covered so much ground, from the specifics of China's new marriage law to these broader universal questions about relationships, finances,
Mm.
and the evolving dynamics between men and women in the 21st century.
It's been quite a journey, and
Wow.
I hope our listeners have found it as enlightening as I have.
Me too. So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. If you have any thoughts or reactions you'd like to share, send us an email or leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And until next time, keep diving deeper, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the fascinating world around us.